Hey guys, it's Casey and welcome back for part 8 of our tower defense tutorial. In the last video, we set up just a little bit of extra functionality for our spawner. We made it so that now when we go to spawn our towers, if we highlight over each other, they cannot build, and we stopped ourselves from building. I like it, it works well. One quick thing I want to turn off that I noticed, I still have personally the debug turned on still on our line trace. I'm going to turn that off just so we don't draw that anymore. It was just a little bit of an eyesore. So what I talked about, I think what I talked about at the end of that, I just recorded that video 5 minutes ago, I'm already forgetting. I talked about going and doing the spawner next. So we will set up some of the logic for our waves of enemies that come at us. So what I want to do is, well, let's back up and let's think about this conceptually. Depending on how you want your game structured, you may be looking for some different functionality with your spawning. I know games like, say, like Bloons, or at least the last Bloons that I played, I think it was like Bloons 5 or 6. I don't know what number they're on. Maybe it's even a smaller number than that. It was fixed. No matter what level I was playing, level 5 was the same level 5. Level 10 was the same level 10. So for them, and that's kind of what we're going to set up here, is that if we have a fixed way of spawning, that's what we're going to set up. But I know other games that it randomized a lot of things. Like one of my favorite tower defenses back in the day was Warcraft 3, and it was UTD. And then it was so dynamic. You could do like 120 waves, and with each wave, it could be like one of 5 different types of waves, and with that, it could have a modifier. And based on all of these things, it would randomize what mesh it was, what type of enemy, and there was all these dynamic values being thrown around. With that, you really just need more of a standardized system, and you're doing a lot of randomization and then modifiers based off of that. We're not really going to set that up. I think that's more of a specialized situation. If that's what something you are looking for and you have some questions of how to set that up, feel free to ask me in the comments, and I will be happy to try and write in text how I would set that up. But for our purposes, I think that's pretty overkill, and I think that game is pretty unique in that sense, so that's not what we're going to set up. What we're going to set up is a fairly structured way of doing it, but on top of doing the structured way, you can add some of your own flavor to it and add some randomization if you would like to. So what I'm going to do is we are going to make a new type of structure because I want to make a new type of data table. So if we go under blueprints and we do a new structure, let's call this our runner structure. And it sounds like there is a thunderstorm starting outside, so I apologize if that comes through the mic at all. And now these are going to be our variables that make up our runners. So let's do the name like I've done before. Let's set up name first. And now, after name, let's do health. Health is pretty obvious for me. Let's set that to be a float. Let's set run speed to be also a float. Let's do that. So let's do dynamic health, dynamic run speed, and let's also do a dynamic mesh. So let's do a static mesh. And I believe before we found it was a static mesh. Or do we want static meshes? Or do we want our runner? Let's see here. I think I'm going to set my runner up to be a static mesh. What I recommend you do for your game, if you want your runners to be different skeletal meshes, I don't have multiple, the issue is I don't have skeletal meshes set up in my scene, or else in this, like, in this default tower, or top-down template, the only skeletal mesh I have is the default Unreal Mannequin. So the issue is if I set up a skeletal mesh in this blueprint, or in this structure, actually, I'm not going to have a way of visualizing it, but I guess maybe that's okay for you guys. Normally, what you're going to have is if, like, some of you will probably be having multiple enemies in your game. You're going to have maybe a chicken run through your game, and then you're going to have some big bad guy, and then maybe you have a boss. So what we're going to do is I'll actually set it up. I'll set it up as a skeletal mesh, but just know, in my game, I don't have multiple skeletal meshes set up in this project, so for visual purposes, I'm going to be using the same skeletal mesh for all of my enemies. Just know that. Slight drawback, maybe I should have set up some more. Maybe I'll do that for a future video. Maybe I'll grab another. I'm just afraid of using someone else's content in one of my videos, and then I just don't want to deal with maybe the hassle that comes with that. I would like to do this with just the default stuff, but maybe in the future we'll change that. But for now, we have our structure. We set up the name, health, run speed, and the mesh. Is that enough for me for now? I think so. And once again, we can always add more complexity when we want it. So now let's do a new data table, and I believe that's under miscellaneous and a data table. What structure do we want? We want our runner structure. Hit OK, and now this is going to be our runner data table. Perfect. just like we've done before, let's make 3 waves. So what we'll do is, should we have done names, or should we have, I think I'm fine with names. Let's see. The issue is we did a string. How do we want to grab out of our data table? I think we want to grab out of our data table based on the wave number. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to store the row names as numbers, and I think I'm also going to make the name itself that same number. I think we'll stay consistent there. I can if we wanted to, we could go back and change our structure instead of a string to be an integer, but I think I'm okay with keeping it as a string for the name. We could, if we wanted to, we could call this wave and we could make it an integer. I guess we'll do that. But I could potentially foresee a reason why we would want to keep that as a string, but maybe we won't run into that, so I'll actually change it to be wave and we'll make it an integer. So now we have wave row name is 1 and we'll change the wave to be 1. Let's set on wave 1, let's set it to be 15 HP, sure. Let's set the run speed. Let's check what our default run speed is right now. It's probably 600, I believe. If we go under our AI runner, if we go to the character movement component, there is going to be a section called max walk speed, and by default it is 600. So I'm fine with that. Let's make the first runner be 600. So that'll be our first wave, and let's just set this. Once again, I only have 1 skeletal mesh, so I'm just going to keep that as my mannequin. For you, if you want to use multiple skeletal meshes, go for it. That's why I made that extra row, is to try and show you can have as many skeletal meshes as you want. So now let's set up wave 2, and let's make the health. I'm going to set the health to be something crazy. Let's set it to be like 100 HP, but I'm going to set the run speed to be, if by default that one's 600, let's set this one to be like 200. He's going to move at 1/3 of the speed, but have a little over 6 times the health. I think I'm okay with that. Wave 2 should be harder than wave 1, and I'll set that to be the skeletal mesh. And then we'll set up one more wave. Let's make wave 3. So we'll set 3 and 3. Let's set the health to be pretty low. Let's set the health only to be 30. But instead of the run speed being 600, let's set it to be like 1000. This will be like our super fast, he's going to fly through. So we have our normal wave, which would be like wave 1, which they just kind of mosey on through. We'll do wave 2, it's some slow, maybe in your game this would be some fat guy that has a bunch of HP. And then wave 3, this will be like our small, super fast runner that flies through our level. I could also see a situation, maybe we want to spawn different amounts of our enemies. So let's actually add that to our structure. I said how easy this was. So what we'll do is we'll make a new variable and we'll call this enemy count. So now what we can do is we can set that to be an integer. And now if we go back to our table, we see we have an extra value called enemy count. Personally, I don't like how we have this big gap in our numbers for the mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reorder this. To the right of our values inside of our structure, we have these arrows. I'm going to press the up arrow and I'm going to move my enemy count just to be above the skeletal mesh. That makes things a little bit more visually appealing for me. So what I'm going to do for wave 1, let's have 10 enemies. For wave 2, let's set 2. We'll just have like 2 big guys. And for wave 3, let's do 5 super fast runners. I'm not trying to be balanced with this. I'm not trying to actually think of game design reasons. I'm just trying to articulate we can have different amounts of enemies. So let's set that up. Now let's go over and I can think of one more thing I want to add here, but let's actually go to our spawner and I'll show you why we want to add that. So what I did is before we have this set up to spawn enemies on begin play. Let's get rid of that. We're actually going to do this game right now. So what we're going to do is we are going to let the player choose when to start the next level. So what we're going to do is we are going to make a custom event in our spawner and we're going to call this next wave. And on next wave, what we want to do is we want to see what wave we're on right now. So let's make a variable and let's call this wave. So we can store what wave we're on. By default, let's make our wave wave 1. So now what we can do is with wave 1, we can get out what is our wave. So we can get data table row name, or not row names, we want to do get data table row. And with that, we can convert our integer. It's going to give us an issue here. This is why I was tempted to store wave as a string before. It's going to give us an issue here. So what we're actually going to do is what we want to do first is we want to convert our integer to a string. And now from a string, if we highlight, we can convert it to a name. A little wacky, a little bit weird. But integer to string, string to name, plug it into the row name. Hopefully that works just fine. We have our runner data table, Now we can get the data of our wave. So I'm going to delete this stuff here just because it was extra code before. We know this is our spawner code to set up our spawner. So I'm going to take a drink real quick. So now what we're going to do is we want to spawn the amount of enemies we have. Normally how I would spawn a group of things, or normally how I would think through spawning a group of things, is that naturally we could do something like a for loop. We could say, hey, the first index is 1 and the last index is our enemy count. The issue with that is that you cannot do delays inside of these loops. Inside of the Unreal defined loops, we can't do a delay off of the loop. It's going to read us back an error and it's going to tell us no. So we kind of have to do our own loop. We have to design a loop ourselves. So what we're going to do is off of row found, we're going to do a branch, and we're going to check to see how many enemies we have spawned. We're going to check, have we spawned more enemies than our enemy count? So I'm going to make a new integer, and I'm going to call this spawn count. So I'm going to check, how many enemies have we spawned? Is our spawn count greater than or equal to? Should we just do greater than? We'll do greater than. So we're going to do, is our spawn count greater than our enemy count? If that is false, what we're going to do is we are going to spawn our enemy. So if we are false, let's spawn our AI runner. And then with our AI runner, what we want to do is we want to feed our runner our data now. Let's feed it this runner struct data. So let's go inside of our runner. Let's make a new variable, and let's call this our runner struct. And then we will go over and we will do runner structure. Save compile inside of our spawner off of this cast. Let's do set runner struct. So let's tell it its information that comes all the way over from here. So from our row. And now what we can do inside of our runner is, let's see here. Should we have done that elsewhere? So what do we need to set? We need to set our health, we need to set our run speed, and we need to set our mesh. So let's see, that actually might be overkill. I don't think we actually need to store this struct inside of our runner. Thinking about it, I think that might be a little unnecessary, because what we can do is we can set our runner data right here. I think I kind of like that better, because here we're kind of duplicating this data, and then it's going to be inside of all of our runners. That might be a little unnecessary, so I'm actually going to delete that struct. I changed my mind. I'm sorry. I seem to do this a good bit in these videos, at least once a video. So I'm actually going to delete that variable we made, and let's just set our runner data here where we're spawning the runner. So off of the cast to runner, what are the three things that we need to set? We need to set its health, we need to set its run speed, and we need to set its mesh. So off of our runner, let's do set health, because I believe we've already made a health float inside of our runner a while ago. So let's set up its health. Off of our runner, I think we can do get movement component, and with this movement component, we can set max walk speed. How can we do this? Set max walk speed. It doesn't like that. Let's see, pawn movement component. What is this? Character movement. We want get character movement component. Get character. There we go. So what we want is, if we drag off of our runner, we want character movement. And with this character movement, now we can do set max walk speed. And we can set that to be our run speed. And then the last thing we will do is we will get our mesh. So if we, what was it called? It was just called mesh. So if we get mesh, we can do set skeletal mesh. And what we are going to do is we are going to set that up to our mesh. And once again, if you don't plan on using multiple meshes in your game, don't worry about setting up the skeletal mesh part of it. If you don't plan on using skeletal meshes and you plan on using static meshes for your runners, that's fine too. You don't want to use skeletal meshes, you want to use static meshes, but I hope it's pretty clear that it's really easy to flip-flop that stuff over, or to just not do that part at all. So now, our code is, when we decide to start our next wave, we're going to get the data of our wave out of our table, and with that, what we're going to do is we are going to check to make sure, have we spawned more enemies than our enemy count? If we have not, we're going to spawn one of the runners, we're going to set up all of its data, and then what we want to do is we want to take our spawn count, and what we're basically going to do is we're going to add 1 to this value and then set it. But there's a single node that we can use for that, and if we type ++, it's called increment integer. And what this does is, I believe if we highlight it, it says it adds 1 to the specified value and then sets it. So it's basically going to take our current spawn count, add 1 to it, and then set the spawn count to be equal to that amount. Very useful, very clean node to use. And now what we want to do is we want to delay. And what we're going to delay is this is how we're going to separate our runners. When we loop through this, if we didn't delay, we would spawn all of our runners basically probably on the same tick of the game. They would all be on top of each other. It wouldn't make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate them by a certain amount, and that's going to be our delay. So after we delay, so we're spawning a runner, we're incrementing our spawn count, we're delaying, and then we want to come all the way back to our branch to check to see if have we passed our spawn count amount. So I can see one more thing we need to set up here, and it is that, think about our first wave when we come through. We're going to come through, we're going to be spawning a bunch of runners, we're going to be setting our spawn count up. When we go to spawn our next wave, we need to reset this spawn count amount. So when we call next wave, I just want to set the spawn count back to 0. And that will make it so that that is reusable each wave. And I think we look pretty good there. I'm sorry for this being a little sloppy, for that going all the way back. This is an artificial way of doing your own loops. It is basically what we're doing here. Like I said, you can't use delays after the Unreal defined loops, so that's kind of an issue. The one thing I want to do is let's increase this delay to like 1 second, and let's see how this code works. So what we want to do is we want to call next wave. So I'm actually going to do this off of begin play. I'm just going to delay by like 2 seconds, and let's pretend that we're calling this event after 2 seconds ourselves, and that will set up in a minute how we can manually call this instead of having it be automatic. So we'll call next wave, and then next wave will grab the wave and we will go through, and let's see how that works. So let's hit play. And now after 2 seconds, I believe our waves should spawn. There you go. And you can see they're separated by a second. They're going to run through. I think I said we did 10. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Ooh, you can see we did 1 extra. So what we want to do is that with our spawn count, we want the default to be 1. And now that will make it so that it matches the spawn count here. We were spawning 1 extra. So let's see, how can we call this by the player? Normally what we would probably want is that in between waves, we probably want some type of overlay to be on the screen for the player to say, hey, I want to start the next wave. So let's create a new widget. So let's make a UI. We'll call this a user interface, and we will do, let's see, let's call this spawn next wave widgets. And with this, once again, let's just do something simple. And let's do a button. Let's drag a button. Let's put it on like the top of the screen. Let's put it on like the top left of the screen, and we'll call it, and we'll make a text, and we'll put the text inside the button, and we'll make the text say spawn next wave. And we will rename our button just to call spawn. And what I'm going to do is, like I did before, I'm going to wrap my canvas panel in a size box. And I'm going to wrap the size box in a scale box. And for me, I'm going to set my size box. I'm going to override the width and the height, and I'm going to make it 1920 by 1080. Perfect. So I'm happy with that. And now what we want to do is we need to add this to our player's viewport. So let's see. When should we add this to the player's viewport? So I can see that we should add this to the player's viewport at the start of the game. So at the very start of the game, when we're ready to do the first wave, we should add it to the player's viewport. So for this part of the code, your game is probably going to differ. You might not want the player to be able to spawn the first wave until they build some towers or before you read some text on the screen. So, and that's what I really hope that you guys take away, and that's why I'm explaining my logic, is that you don't have to copy exactly what I'm doing, but that you can kind of set this up yourself and that you can think it through yourself. So what I'm going to actually do is that on begin play of our spawner, I'm going to create the widget inside of here. And the reason being is that I need to be able to, from the widget, when we hit this spawn next wave, I want to be able to run this next wave event. So for me, it kind of makes sense to add the widget inside the spawner so that we can feed a value of an actor reference of our spawner to our widget. So it's going to be spawn next wave widget. And inside of this widget, what I want to do is I want to create a variable, and I want it to be our spawner. And I'm going to make that variable of class spawner. And now what we can do is that inside of our spawner, when we create this widget, we can set spawner, and we can get a reference to ourself, and we can hook that up, and now our widget knows who our spawner is. And then let's just add this to the player's viewport. And then inside spawn next wave, when our player clicks our spawn button, what we're going to do is we are going to get our spawner, we are going to call next wave, and then we are going to remove from parent our widget. I'd say that's pretty simple. If we wanted to, we could add a little bit more functionality, and we could actually, instead of doing this text, let's call this text spawn wave, and then we'll call it, at first we'll call it spawn wave 1. Let's make this text a variable. And what we're actually going to do is that inside of our event begin play, when we actually create our widget, let's do one extra thing. Let's set the text of that. So what do we call that? Or let's make this text box, let's call it wave text. So in the top right of our text, we need to make it a variable, and we need to name it wave text. Then inside of our spawner, when we create this, let's get wave text. So we have a reference to that text box, and now let's set text of that text box, and let's dynamically set what's inside of that box, and we will this value, this pin, if you haven't really seen it before, this like pink, I'm not really sure what color it comes through for you guys, but to me this is kind of like a pink, but it's not kind of the same as our string pink, and that's because it's called text. Text is a little difficult to work with. I don't really know of good ways to really work with text, so oftentimes if I need to work with text, I will work first in strings. So what I want to do is I want to make string, make a literal string, and that what we want to do is we actually want to append. So actually I'm going to delete that, and it's actually easier to work inside of an append. What an append is that it allows us, as it says, I think it says concatenate, yeah, that's the word, concatenates two strings together or more. We can add more pins to do more, to make a new string. And then what we can do with this return value is we can just plug that into text, and you'll see the game will convert it for us. But what do we call it inside of here? We said spawn wave 1. So what we can do is we can type spawn wave and then a space at the end of wave, and we can just get our variable, our wave variable, plug it in, and now when we create this widget, it will change that text to be spawn wave space whatever wave comes next. So that's some kind of cool functionality we can do there. I think we need to compile this, and then that error will go away. Perfect. Let's see. So on the click, we're spawning the next wave and removing the widget. I'm happy with that. And then what we're going to do is, actually, let's see here. Let's test this out. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's test this out. We're only 20 minutes into the video, so we got plenty of time to work with. So you can see I have our button. It says spawn wave 1, and I can click it, and let's see what happens. Perfect. We spawned our wave, and I'm happy with that. So what we want to do now is we want to check, when does our wave die? I believe now people are shooting off fireworks because it is July 3rd. How about that? Maybe a bad time to do a video. I really hope that noise isn't annoying. If it is too annoying, then you're probably not going to see this video, and I'm going to be re-recording it, sadly. So let's see here. What we want to do now is, when we go through the course of playing our game, we want to know, when does the player kill all of our runners? That's pretty important, right? We need to know, when is the wave ending? So this code handles spawning, but now we need to check, when does the wave actually end? So what I want to do is, off of event tick, what I want to do is we're going to tick and check to see how many runners are actually alive. There's kind of a cool way we can do this, and if we wanted to, we can actually promote this AI runner here. Let's promote that to a variable, and let's call this our alive runners. And what we're actually going to do is I'm going to temporarily delete this set node, and what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change this, instead of being a single runner, I'm going to change this to being an array. How we do that is we want to click this icon on the very right of our of that variable, and now we can change it to be an array. The reason being is that we're not just going to have one runner in our level, we're going to have a bunch. And what we want to do is we want to check how many of them are actually alive. So I'm going to get this array that we just made, and what I'm going to do is right after our cast AI runner, I'm just going to type add, and that's how you add things to an array, or one of the ways that you can add things to an array. I'm going to hook it up, and then I'm just going to take that cast node and plug it on into that add. So that means that every time we spawn a runner, we're going to be adding the runner to this array. I like that. And then something cool we can actually do is that you can see here, we've told each of our runners who our spawner is. Why did we do that? I'm trying to remember. Why did we set up the spawner for our runners? I can't exactly remember what we did there. But we did that for a reason. Yeah, we did it for a reason. I think it's because we needed to get the spawner back out when we shot at the runner, I think it was. Not exactly 1000%. Oh yeah, no, we told our runners who our spawner was to do our nav mesh. That was why we did it. But we have a multi-purpose now. What we can actually do is that when we kill our runners, right before we actually destroy the runner, what we can actually do is we can get that that runner, that alive runners that we have, and we can actually do something called remove item. And what this does is that we can actually find who this runner is. So this is an individual runner, and what we're doing is that when this runner dies, we're going to get that reference to our spawner, we're going to grab that array of live runners, and we're going to do remove item, and what it wants is it wants an AI runner object reference, and what we can do is we can reference self. And what it's going to do is it's going to remove that specific runner from this array, so that hopefully when we kill all of the runners, this array will become empty. And that's convenient because in our spawner, on tick, we're going to check, hey, is this array empty? We can check the length of this array, and if it is equal to 0, that means we've killed all the runners. So what we can do is we can do a branch, and now we know when all the runners are dead. I can see an issue though, is that this is also going to be checking if all the runners are dead if we haven't started a wave. So what I want to do is I want to create a boolean, and we're going to check to see if we're in the middle of a wave. Pretty simple. So I'm going to create a boolean, I'm going to change it back to just be a single variable, and I'm going to call this in wave ? Normally I don't do question marks on my booleans, but I think it's pretty easy for beginners to understand, hey, we're starting a wave, right? So what we're going to do right before we spawn any runners is actually, I could see that being an issue. Let's not do it there. If we set our in wave to be true here, we haven't spawned any runners yet, so actually that's going to trigger. We want to do this after we spawn a runner. Let's see here. Let's actually do it once we're done spawning runners. Think about this. We only want this to trigger, this event tick, to say, hey, we've killed all of our runners once we've killed all of our runners. If we tried to set is wave right here, what would happen is that we haven't spawned any runners yet, so technically they're all dead. But if we also set is wave to be true in the middle of spawning all of our runners, potentially the player could put all of his towers at the beginning of the level, and he could kill the runners as they come out, and this array would become empty. We want to make is wave to be true once we finish spawning all of our runners. And when have we finished spawning all of our runners? When this looping branch finally goes to true. So that's a convenient way of doing that. And let's do, so what we want to do is on tick, we want to check, are we in wave and have all of our runners died? Perfect. I like it. And now if this is true, so this is going to be a check to see, is our wave over? If our wave is over, we can run whatever code we want now. For me, I just want to run this code again. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to reuse this code, and let's make a custom event, and we're going to name it create spawn widget. And I'm just going to hook that up. If we wanted to, we could call this create spawn widget on begin play, which actually let's do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to remove this pin just so it's a little bit cleaner. And so we're going to create the spawn widget on begin play, and when we finish a level and kill all of our enemies. So we'll call create spawn widget. So I think we will have a pretty functioning game now. Let's try this out. So what should happen is that we can manually create some towers. We can tell the game, hey, we're ready, spawn our waves, and we should be able to kill wave by wave and start the next wave when we're ready. So let's try this out. So we can hit play. I don't want to spawn the wave yet. Let's make some towers. So I'm going to hit my create tower button. I'm going to create some bushes. Let's create some chairs. And let's see how our towers do. So spawn wave, and we're going to shoot some enemies. Looks good to me. We're shooting them. Looks good. I kind of wish I didn't make it 10 enemies now, but there you go. You see, once we killed that 10th enemy, we created our new button. So something happened here. It still says spawn wave 1, and I think I know why that is. I think we didn't increase our wave number. So here we're getting our wave. I don't think we ever set our wave to be +1. So what I'm actually going to do is that since we only are calling our wave variable here, how should we do that? I think we should actually do it here. I think that makes sense. Let's set our wave up to be 1 right here. So let's increment our wave. You can either do ++ or type in the word increment. Since this is the logic of we're checking when we finally killed that wave, let's also make it that this is where we set our wave to go up 1. That makes pretty clear sense to me, because I was thinking maybe that we can just set the wave up to be 1 right after this get data table row, but maybe we want up in like the corner of the screen for it to say what wave it is, and maybe we want something to happen in our game when we do change waves. So I could see that being an issue. So let's just do it here. That'll be once we kill all of the enemies in the current wave, we set the wave to be up 1 and we create the next widget. So let's try this out once more. Hopefully everything is good to go now. So let's create some towers, and now let's kill our enemies. And you can see our towers are working dynamically as we set it up before, and hopefully our runners are also dynamic. So let's note their run speed. You can see they move at a pretty healthy clip. Oh my gosh. We need to do extra logic. We did not finish our logic. We are setting the wave up to be 1 every little second. That is an issue. Why is that? Well, I don't think we're ever turning isWave to be false, right? If we right click our isWave and we do find references, we're only setting our inWave once, and we're setting it to be true. What we want to do is that right after this event right here, once we've killed all of our enemies, we need to set our isWave back to false. So I missed a little bit of logic there. I apologize, but hey, we're working through it together. We're learning. So let's set up our towers again, and let's spawn the wave. So we're killing our enemies, we're killing our enemies. Let's see how far we can get here. Hopefully everything works good now. There's our 10th enemy. We killed it, and now we have spawn wave 2. How about that? Let's hit spawn wave 2. And now you can see, if you remember in our data table, our runners were super slow, but they were super tanky, and we only set there to be 2 of them. So that's pretty cool. There is something that I didn't like about this, and that is that, did you see how close they were spawned together? Do you see how they're almost like back to back, whereas our normal moving runners were spaced out pretty decently? We're going to address that right after this. And here we go. We have wave 3. This is our final wave that we made. And you can see these we made to be like super duper quick. I don't think we're going to be able to kill these guys. I think they're going to be too fast, and they're just too fast for our projectiles. That is kind of an issue, but that's more of a game design thing, in my opinion. But yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I think that works well. But there's one thing I want to add before we finish up this video. I liked how fast the first wave spawned. I did not like how that second wave spawned. I think the slow moving guys spawned way too close to each other, but I did enjoy how that first wave spawned. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to our structure, and let's add one more float, and we're going to call this the spawn speed. And we're going to make this is going to be the value for the delay. Inside of our spawner, you remember this delay is the delay between spawning our runners. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this more of a dynamic number. So in our data table, what we have now is we have our spawn speed. Once again, I don't like how that's below the mesh, so I'm going to hit that up arrow, move it up. So on the first wave, let's set the spawn speed to be once per second. Let's set the second wave to be maybe once every 5 seconds. And let's make the spawn speed on our super fast wave, I think they might have been a little bit too spaced out, so let's make that every half second. And let's just run through this once more really quickly to end up our episode. Let's quickly create some towers. Bush, bush, bush. I think that can handle it. So now let's see. This should be spawning. Oh, no, we didn't set up the variable. I messed up. We need to do one more thing. Inside of our spawner, we need to hook up that delay. So now with our spawn speed, we just need to punch that straight into our delay, and voila, we have dynamic waves. This really is how simple it is. I think when I showed some of my friends how you can do some of this stuff, they're amazed because I think they thought they would be making a separate blueprint for every single runner. They'd be making a bunch of stuff. It's really this simple, guys. The more you can reuse your code effectively and properly, the better. That you really can make some cool things pretty quickly if you structure it properly. So wave 1, we're spawning it once every second. We're just nailing these guys as they come out to speed it up. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And then wave 2, now instead of these guys being spawned right on top of each other a second later, you can see now we spaced it out 5 seconds. Once again, how fast or how slow you want to spawn these is all up to you. And now we can spawn wave 3. Let's do it. We're flying through. And you can see this is all balanced for your game. How fast, how slow you want these guys to be, what you want them to look like. I really challenge you to customize it yourself. So that'll do it for this video. I like our spawner. I like how it's set up. We now have a very simple widget to start our next waves. We can calculate when the player is in wave, when he's out of wave. I think we're getting there. What will we do next? I think we'll maybe set up our simple game logic. We'll very quickly set up some lives for the players so that when our enemies do hit the end there, they disappear, and we set our lives to be down 1, and we'll kind of have like 10 lives maybe. And then after that, I think we'll start doing a few of like the polished things that you normally see in a game. We'll set up some particles, maybe we'll set up some sound effects, we'll set up some explosions, we'll do some cool things with our projectiles. So that'll be next, and I hope you guys stick around for the rest of the tutorials.